תודה לרפי, ואני אעבור להצגת המרצה השני. פרופסור דיוויד ריבסטיין משמש כפרופסור וויליאם סטיוארט וודסייד בבית ספר וורטון למנהל עסקים באוניברסיטת פנסילבניה. מחקרו של פרופסור ריבסטיין מתמקד בין השאר באסטרטגיות שיווק תחרותיות ומדדי שיווק. לאחרונה מחקרו עוסק באסטרטגיות שיווק תחרותיות ובתגובות של המתחרים לפעולות השיווק שנוקטות חברות, ומציע לחברות תובנות ודרכים כיצד לצפות תגובות אלו וכיצד להשתמש בהן כחלק מתכנון אסטרטגי. עבודתו של פרופסור ריבסטיין בנושא מדדים מתמקדת בניסיון לקשר בין מדדי שיווק לתוצאות פיננסיות, ותוצאות מחקריו בנושא זה אף פורסמו בספרו האחרון, מרקטינג מטריקס. פרופסור ריבסטיין מייעץ לחברות שונות, בין השאר ל-GE, ג'ונסון & ג'ונסון ועוד רבות אחרות. הוא ערך סדרת ראיונות עומק עם מנכ"לים בנושא מדדי שיווק, ועתה יש לו תוכנית רדיו משלו בערוץ הרדיו של וורטון, שמשדר תוכניות בנושאי ניהול ועסקים. פרופסור ריבסטיין, בבקשה.
Does this work? Yeah, okay. Well, good morning. And delighted to be here. Really appreciate being here and being invited here. So there are several people I need to thank. But just to get to my content, I'll jump into it right now. And I very much appreciate the presentation by Professor Milnick because he went through a considerable amount of data, and I'm going to do the same thing. You're going to be inundated with more data about Israel. My data is very different than what it is that you saw from Professor Milnick because his was all objective data. And what it is that I want to look at is the brand of Israel, that is how Israel is perceived around the world. So that's what it is that I'm going to be doing across a whole number of dimensions. But let me begin by setting some groundwork for this. And in particular, I want to just talk about a brand. And you don't need a short tutorial on a brand because we all know brands. But when we think of a brand, it's an association that people have in their mind and an expectation one might have. So we all have an understanding when we see the Apple logo of what that brand represents and some expectations that we happen to have for it. So one of the questions I think about is whether or not a nation has a brand and a set of expectations. So when you think of Israel, what are some of the associations that one might have with Israel? And how might one think about Israel and what it is that it represents? Companies invest in building their brand, and they do so because it has an economic benefit to them. They get that through either creating higher prices or more volume. And in essence, what I have here is what you had in your very first lecture in your economics course of a demand curve. And as you establish your brand and build your brand, what you're doing is you are shifting that curve outward. And as you shift it outward, it allows you to either charge a higher price or to command greater volume. And most companies take it through both. And when you try and calculate what the value of a brand is, you look at that area that has been created by shifting a demand curve outward. But the point that I want to make is companies invest in building their brand because there's economic value in it. And so that's why I want to think about the brand Israel. Companies invest in their brand, and there is that association with it. I would argue that nations have a brand, and there's an economic consequence to that as well. And so what I want to know is what's the brand Israel, and what are the implications of that? And so typically the economic consequence is not through higher price or greater volume, but it does happen along some economic dimensions. Either it happens through tourism, or it happens through exports and foreign trade, or it happens through foreign direct investment. All of these which happen to lead to GDP. And I'm going to be looking at the same index that Professor Milnick was looking at of GDP per capita in trying to assess that and see what Israel's brand has been. When you think about brands, we have various different images. And in fact, let me go here. You think about nations and you generalize from them. So when we think about shoes from Italy, we think they must be stylish. French wines must be superior. And actually, when we see a car happens to come from Germany, we think it happens to be well engineered. And those are associations that people have with a country that are then transferred onto the products that they have. So some nations are really strong with their brand. There's a company that I assume none of you have heard of. It's actually been started by a former student of mine that happens to be called Harry's Razors. And their advertisements, which I've had nothing to do with, says engineered in Germany. Now, first of all, I don't have a lot of association with razors. And secondly, I'm thinking, what's it mean for a razor blade to be engineered in Germany? That doesn't necessarily translate for me. Why do they do that? Because people believe if it comes from Germany, it must be superior, as there is an association that exists with Germany. But that's part of what it is that they do. Location makes a lot of difference. All of you, I assume, are very familiar with Haagen-Dazs ice cream. I find it interesting that they call their brand Haagen-Dazs. If I ask you where Haagen-Dazs is from, most people would say, well, Haagen-Dazs must be from Scandinavian country. When in reality, it was started in Brooklyn, and right now it's headquartered in New Jersey. But they find it more beneficial to call it Haagen-Dazs ice cream rather than New Jersey ice cream, because there's a positive association with Scandinavia and products that happen to come from that. Lenovo is a German company, is a Chinese company, and yet they've chosen a name of Lenovo so you don't think of it as Chinese. Actually, to me, Lenovo sounds almost like Italian. It's like Lenovo. But certainly, they don't want you to think you're entrusting your data in a Chinese product. And so the name and the country of origin makes a lot of difference. But I'm going to look at Israel specifically and see what it is that's going on. We know of Israel as a technological innovator, and you invest a lot in trying to bring companies here to invest in technology here in Israel. And the question is, what benefit does Israel per se get beyond the employment that we were just talking about? Israel could be better known for its technology. You may think it is highly known, but I'm going to tell you that we think of Intel, but do we think of Israel inside or Intel inside? You know that much of what it is that's been developed with the Intel chip was developed here in Israel. Most people in the world do not realize that. And I've talked to some people here in Israel at Intel, and they've said to me, Intel doesn't want people to know it's from Israel. And the question is, what's the impact of that? So what I want to do is I'm going to report to you a study that I've done that looks at the brand of various different nations, Israel being one of them. And I have surveyed over 16,000 people around the world and asked them perceptions of various different countries. And I have grouped, actually I've asked them this on 65 different attributes, and I've grouped those attributes into some composite variables. And I've looked in what you see in these numbers here, or how each of these variables are correlated with GDP per capita, same measure that we were just looking at. And I'm going to report to you how Israel is perceived on these particular dimensions. So let me tell you, first of all the data that I'm going to show you are wrong. You're going to disagree with the data. The data that we just saw was objective data, objective economic data. I'm going to show you perceptions. And perceptions, by their nature, are wrong, but they're also people's perceptions, and that's what it is that we're looking at. And that's what they base their behavior on. So Israel was ranked number 25 out of 60 nations. And I'm going to go into the details of that. What I will tell you is, here are the top 5 nations. This is the perception of these nations and how this brand is related and correlates with their GDP per capita. What you see is Germany has the strongest brand, and Canada the second strongest. And actually, when I generated these results, I got a lot of criticism within the United States of, what, United States is not number 1. And we saw United States has the largest GDP, but when we look at it per capita and how the brand contributes to that, it's not nearly as high. It is still high, number 4. But we see the top 5 here, and again, Israel is number 25. Let's look specifically at what's underlying this. Overall ranking number 25, I can take my data of over 16,000 people, I can break it into subgroups and look at how it is that business decision makers, which I have about 6,500 business decision makers in my database, have Israel ranked number 23. Not too far from the index that we saw earlier. Here, what we have is the ranking on each of the major dimensions that I've got. And in the far right column, the ranking by business decision makers. And I'm going to highlight just some of these. In terms of a citizen, and I'm going to define this for us, a citizen of the world, it's ranked number 24. Business decision makers see it higher than that. In terms of being a mover in the world, and again, I'm going to define this for us, ranked number 14, that's really good. Ranked number 7 by business decision makers. Open for business, actually really low, number 52, higher by business decision makers. And quality of life, number 34 or 28 by business decision makers. But let's look at these. Here we can see it graphically. And so what we can see is the ranking overall on each of these particular dimensions. And we get to see what it is that we're looking at. Let's explore each of these dimensions and what it is that we have. In terms of adventure, Israel is ranked as number 53. Let me define what adventure means. But by the way, if you're questioning the data, look at the top 5 that you see here, and you might say, does this make sense or not? Brazil, number 1, Italy, number 2, Spain, number 3, in terms of adventure. What does adventure really mean? Fun. Actually, I've been to Israel several times. Every time I've come to Israel, I've had lots of fun. Beaches are great. The images that are of Israel that are broadcast all around the world do not convey fun at all. And of the 60 nations that I have, Israel's ranked 57th in terms of fun. In terms of scenic, I think Israel's really beautiful. Again, if you think of the images that people have of Israel, again, broadcast throughout all the media, number 54. Pleasant climate, I like it, but I like warmth. But lots of people see it as desert-like climate. Friendly and sexy, not very sexy. And you know differently than that. I think you're going to disagree with this data. Beg your pardon? When they say sexy, I think they must be. But this is the perception around the world. And by the way, as I said, you will not agree with the data. But this is how people perceive us. In terms of citizenship, Sweden, number 1, Canada, number 2, Denmark, number 3. What does citizenship really mean? Respects property rights, progressive. You can read the rest of the list up there. I put the ranking from the business decision makers so you can see that there are some differences between the business decision makers and the overall population. But interesting, cares about the environment, actually viewed much worse than the overall population, is what it is that we see. And religious freedom is not perceived to be very high, which is interesting as well. So again, looking at these, you get to see what those overall rankings are. I'm going to continue down this path for a little bit. In terms of cultural influence, France, cultural influence, very high. Italy, cultural influence, very high. When we look at what it is that means, actually, again, to the blindness of my respondents, I think of Israel as very fashionable. That's not the global perception of Israel. I think of Israel as very trendy. That's not the global perception that's there. Happy? Actually, my experiences have been very happy, but that's not the global image. So, you know, I thought about maybe I should stand behind the podium because you might want to throw things. But this is how you are perceived around the world. Entrepreneurship, certainly you should be very, very high in terms of entrepreneurship. And what it is that I see is, you know, we all are very familiar with the book Startup Nation. That is very, very well known and read by everybody in Israel and most of the Jews of the world and not many other people. And you are not highly recognized as being extremely entrepreneurial. High, but not as high as I would have guessed. So again, these are the perceptions that persist that are out there. In terms of heritage, Italy, Spain, Greece, makes sense. That is culturally accessible, many cultural attractions, has a rich history, has great food. Number 14 for movers. And actually distinctive, different, unique, dynamic business decision makers clearly see you as much more distinct than the overall population that's out there. Again, here are these data. All of these data are available, by the way, on my website, so you can look at that and offer, you know, your opinions as you see fit as we go through it. Open for business, number 52 out of 60, which is pretty amazing. And bureaucratic is a general perception, except by business decision makers, not as much. That's there. So we get to see those. Not cheap manufacturing, that's there. This is the one that you have your highest ranking, that's there. And this is the one, actually, this particular finding, Netanyahu has quoted frequently and referred to in the Knesset as that. Strong military, for sure. You know, what we see is politically influential. So this is the highest ranking that's there, is in terms of power that's there. By the way, on all of these, I'm showing the correlation with GDP per capita that we've got. We see that Israel has been very, very strong on that. Quality of life, Canada, number 1. Sweden, number 2. We can look at some of the differences that exist that are here. And again, you can have your own perspectives. Looking in a mirror is not easy. And we may see ourselves very differently. And so one of the questions I have, I've looked at all 60 nations, and I've looked at how the world ranked them and how people within that country in my sample ranked themselves. Of the 60 nations, which nation ranked themselves more highly than the rest of the world, had the biggest difference for how the rest of the world viewed them? Israel. Israel had the biggest difference in how it viewed itself versus how the rest of the world viewed it. Whose fault? Some of it's self-deception. Some of it is a lack of external understanding. And that's part of it. And this, by the way, is widely recognized and seen everywhere. It's on these results are shown on the front page of the New York Times, front page of the Washington Post. It was featured on a late night talk show. You can see, I thought this was a really cute quote. Germany came in first, Canada was second, the United Kingdom ranked third. And we checked in after that. The United States finished fourth. I tell you what, when Donald Trump finds out about this, he's going to sell a lot more hats. So it is highly recognized everywhere. Here was the Jerusalem Post, where Netanyahu was quoting some of these particular results. There's been millions and millions of page views of all of this from all around the world have seen these particular results. You have a brand, whether you like it or not. But there are actions you can take, and I want to spend just a minute talking about that to alter those issues. If the negative perceptions are accurate, then what it is that you need to do is change what it is that you're doing. If the negative perceptions are inaccurate, that's what I think most of you believe, then what you need to do is change those misperceptions. And I think some actions really need to be taken. Where should you take those? I would suggest doing so on those dimensions that have the biggest impact on your economy. And those would be entrepreneurship, citizenship, quality of life, openness for business. What would that mean? Most people do not know the products that come out of Israel. They should. And there's very little effort made to communicate that more broadly. But if you want to change the perceptions, actions need to be taken to change those perceptions. And you need to do so because it will affect your economy. And that's what it is that's important. So, Toda Rabbah.